guys here. This is really an awesome topic that I'm really excited to present and share information with you about. I think that it's fair to say, and I'm certainly going to preface this presentation by saying that there really aren't any specific foods that are magical foods that help us burn body fat. Rather, what it comes down to is it's about, especially when we talk about eating and nutrition and exercise and physical activity and lifestyle as we get older, it is about doing the things that are going to help us maintain lean body composition, help us optimize fat loss by eating the right types of foods to facilitate that process and to offset the natural aging process. And so there's really no magical switch that gets flipped right when we turn 30 or 40 or 50 that all of the sudden changes the way that we store body fat. However, there definitely are certain aspects of the aging process that influence our body composition. So with that said, is this quote unquote aging process is really the process or the decline in our metabolism that can start as early as in our 20s, interestingly enough. And I'm sure that the majority of the people on this call are 50 or older than 50. But with that said, if anyone's tuning in after the fact, this information is not just for our aging population. This is for every demographic of people, because it's very relevant to the aging process, which, as I said, starts as early as our 20s, and it's highly influenced by our nutrition, by our physical activity levels, by the types of physical activity that we do, and by our lifestyle. And so now, let me preface all of this by saying, or by introducing myself, because I don't think I've had the opportunity to meet many of you. My name's Benjamin Brown. I'm an expert fitness and nutrition coach, and I have a company called BSL Nutrition that is a virtual nutrition and fitness coaching company. I have a dual master's degree in clinical nutrition and exercise and wellness, and I've been coaching individuals for close to 20 years now. Most importantly, and certainly the thing that I'm most proud of, is that I am a husband and father of 3. And many of you may know my lovely wife, Christina Brown, who was head of member services for years here at the JCC. I want to make sure and thank the Martin Pare Jewish Community Center for putting these presentations on. We have an incredible relationship with them. They're doing incredible things in the community, and we feel very fortunate to have had the opportunity to raise our kids literally here at the J, to have it be such an important part of our lives. And so now to really be able to contribute as best as we can. And this is my way of contributing, in that I love every aspect of health and nutrition and fitness. So I'd love to be able to share that with you. Now let's dive into aging and metabolism. How does this work? Why is this important? There's a few fundamental things that happen, my friends, as we get older that you probably have observed, right? One is we increase in fat mass. We gain body fat as the standard American, as the average American. I'm not speaking to you as an individual, but just I'm generalizing across the US. We gain fat as we get older. We lose muscle mass as we get older. Starting as early as the age of 30, we lose bone mineral density. We reduce our sex hormone production. Now, these are sex hormones that have to do with estrogen and progesterone. And for many people that maybe going through perimenopause or menopause, there's this imbalance in estrogen to progesterone that can impact certainly our bone mineral density. It certainly can impact our lean muscle mass. It can impact our body's ability to regulate blood sugar and regulate insulin, and so many other factors that influence how, where, and why we store body fat and or muscle mass. And then also, similarly is this very profound relationship between our digestive function and our brain function, or the almost brain degeneration that happens as we get older. Now, I'm confident that all of us know someone with some level of dementia or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. And these are neurodegenerative diseases that obviously increase in propensity as we get older, that are strongly attributed to our nutrition, our lifestyle, our physical activity levels. Now, just touching on a couple of these things is research suggests between the ages of 29 and 39, women typically gain about 7 pounds of body fat, and men put on an additional 15 pounds of body fat. So there's no question that we are gaining body fat as we get older. We're losing muscle mass as we get older. And the problem within that is because most people gain weight as they age to a point, is what's happening is we're losing muscle mass and we're gaining, and we're replacing that muscle mass with fat mass and then some. And that's highly, highly problematic. Now, that's one component here. The other component is this digestive function and neurodegeneration sort of symbiotic relationship. And one of the things that I want to mention to you is you probably are aware to some degree that there's an intense and unique relationship between the brain and the gut. You may have experienced this at varying levels when you're nervous about meeting someone or having an interview or a presentation, and you start to get butterflies in your stomach. This is a perfect example of that brain-gut relationship. And what's important about this is as our brain health declines, our gut health declines, and vice versa. And this is uniquely connected by a nerve that runs from our brainstem all the way into and innervates our digestive lining called the vagus nerve. And so literally the brain and the gut are connected to the degree that as we get older, as brain function declines, so too does digestive function, which means that our food digestion becomes reduced. Our, for some people, bowel movements, just overall gut health in terms of the population of good to bad bacteria, and so on and so forth. So some of the common symptoms that we see that you might be able to relate to are fatigue and depression and digestive problems. And all of these are caused by blood sugar imbalances, by lack of physical activity, by systemic inflammation. Now, whether this is an acute or a chronic disease state that has to do with some level of autoimmunity, leaky gut syndrome, chronic infections, food sensitivities and toxins, and so on and so forth, is it's absolutely worth understanding here that we are what we eat, and what we eat influences our brain health and our gut health as well, which ultimately influences our body's ability to retain lean muscle mass and lose body fat. So let's talk about muscle mass as we age, because this is one of the profound things in the aging process, is that we know we lose a certain amount of muscle mass as we get older every year, to the tune of 3 to 8% muscle mass loss per decade after the age of 30. This starts young, and the rate of decline is even higher after the age of 60. So we need to be doing everything we can possibly do to maintain, if not improve, lean muscle tissue as we age. And this starts well before 50. But even if you're at 50 or above, we need to be doing everything we can to maintain the muscle mass that we've got. Because one of the things that we know happens with muscle mass is, again, as we're reducing it, we replace a lot of this muscle mass with fat mass. And so you can see in the image, hopefully, that on the top is we have a seemingly lean and healthy middle-aged male at 42 years old. And we see very little red around the perimeter of this muscle mass, and certainly within the muscle mass. This is a healthier muscle body. Whereas for a 70-year-old male who also looks to be lean and healthy and fit, we see a vastly different muscle body that both has fat around the perimeter of it, but it also has fat layered in between the muscle spindles. And this is problematic because the more body fat we have, the more metabolically active that tissue is. And so you can kind of think about muscles as we age. If we're not really taking care of them, both from exercise and our nutrition, become kind of like this well-marbled steak. And that's not ideal. And so some of the reasons why this happens is, well, I'll get to that in just a moment here, but it certainly has to do with lack of protein intake. So what we know about aging and muscle mass is 41 and 35% of men and women respectively over the age of 50 consume less than the recommended daily allowance of protein per day. Now this, if you guys take anything from this presentation, it should be this, is the average American is consuming, at least a significant portion of the American population is consuming far too little protein. And the RDA, the recommended daily allowance, is the minimum, the bare minimum amount of protein recommended to prevent disease. In no way is it the optimal amount of protein to help with preventing muscle mass loss, to help support energy, to help support immune system function and muscle and joint integrity and cognitive function, and so on and so forth. So we'll dive into why all of those things are so important. But basically what we're seeing here, my friends, is that we are over fat and we are under muscled. And that in and of itself is of pandemic proportions. As we know that, of course, 65% of the US population is either overweight or obese, right? And we can correlate to the fact that as the statistics I mentioned just earlier, about 16% of the US population the US population in general is only eating about 16% of their calories, right? Of their calories from protein, which means the rest of those calories are coming from carbohydrates and fats. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, except that we all know that of that remaining 84%, we're probably not eating whole grains and vegetables and fruits and healthy fats. It's likely more coming from processed oils and refined carbohydrates and so on and so forth, things that are actually further contributing to disease states. So all of these things contribute to why it makes it harder as we get older to lose that body fat that at one time might have felt much easier to lose. So as I said at the beginning, there's no magical foods that in and of themselves burn body fat, right? That's just marketing hype. It's just dietary dogma. However, what we need to be cognizant of is that if we are looking to lose body fat, it means we need to effectively manage our calories. Okay, we need to effectively manage our calories. And you can see here this sort of pyramid of priorities here when it comes to fat loss. And the number one priority at the bottom of the pyramid, if you can read that, it says calories. So if we're looking to lose body fat, we need to find a way to create a calorie deficit. That means that we're consuming less calories than we're expending on a daily basis. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. As I'm sure you're aware, you can do any number of dieting methodologies. You can do keto and Mediterranean diet and zone diet and Atkins and intermittent fasting, and you can do bars and shakes, and the list goes on and on and on, right? And the only thing that these diets are really good for is helping us create a calorie deficit, because what happens, we end up eating less, we restrict certain food groups. It doesn't really matter what they are, because it helps us create a calorie deficit. So if we are not taking that into account, then we're not doing justice to the fat loss process. Now, within that, that's where we can really start to determine which foods are going to help support this calorie deficit in the best possible way. And that's what we're going to dive into here in a second. And so I've kind of highlighted the categories here, but calories matter most, after which then we can start to talk about the type of diet and how it contributes to the fat loss process. Then we can talk about micronutrients, the vitamins and the minerals. But the reality is, our food system is actually quite good at fortifying our foods with vitamins and minerals, to the degree that it's pretty hard to become deficient per se in any number of vitamins and minerals. But it's certainly not as important as the prior two. And then when we eat, and then supplements. And it's not even worth talking about supplements if we're not focusing on all of the other aforementioned priorities. So let's talk dieting, let's talk fat loss, and let's talk which is the best diet for fat loss. Now, you probably tried some, multiple of these diets in the past, and hopefully you can see this, but essentially what I'm showing you here is a chart of a number of different diets. And each of these diets is made up of different amounts of protein and carbohydrate and fat. And so there's often argument within the industry and within our sort of nutrition world about which diet is best. Well, we should be doing the Mediterranean diet, or we should be doing the zone diet, or we should be eating more of a paleo, and we should be eating more animal protein. No, we should be eating more vegan. But what we know from a fat loss standpoint, and actually more, I should have titled this, what diet is best for weight loss, is what I should have titled this. And let me explain why. Is because what we know is that all of these diets are equally effective for weight loss when calories are equated. And so what I mean by that is, let's just say we're all eating 2,000 calories, and they take all of us, and let's say we have 100 people, and they take all of us and they put us on a 500 calorie deficit. So all of a sudden they give us one of these diets, and each of these diets is made up of 1,500 calories. Some of them have higher amounts of carbohydrates, some of them have higher amounts of fat, and so on and so forth. What we'll find is that all of them are equivalent in terms of how they contribute to weight loss. On the scale, all 100 of us will likely lose a statistically significant amount of weight that is roughly the same across the board when averaged out. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Now, there's a difference though here between weight loss and fat loss and body composition change. And this is the thing that no one's talking about, that I really want you guys to understand, because as we get older, it's not about our weight. Frankly, it's never about our weight. It is about our body composition, our functionality, and the health of our cells and our musculoskeletal tissue and our digestive system and our cognitive function. And the health of all of these things is influenced by the amount of protein and carbohydrate and fats that we're consuming. And so what this says is, reduced calorie diets result in clinically meaningful weight loss, regardless of which macronutrients they emphasize. It doesn't matter what the diet is, guys. They're all going to equate to weight loss, but they're not all going to contribute to improving your body composition, meaning losing more fat, maintaining more muscle mass. And that's what we're going to dig into. And so what we know from a dieting standpoint of when we're in a calorie deficit, there's a few really important things. And this study that I'm showing on the right, it's tough to read, so let me just very briefly explain it to you. But essentially what this study shows is that when they compared 38 different foods, they found a number of these foods to be the most satiating per amount of calories. And so basically what they found in this study, and this is relevant to dieting and calorie management, is because the foods that are the highest in protein and the foods that have the highest amount of fiber and water are the most satiating, meaning they help us stay full for the longest period of time, likely in between meals. And these are foods that are fat loss foods. in that because they help us stay satiated, because their protein levels are high, protein also contributes to satiety. Invariably, they help us eat less throughout the day, ultimately is what I'm getting at here. And so this study that tried to determine which foods are most satiating is some of the foods that I'm going to share with you here in just a moment. But it was very interesting to see the comparison in the different food types, specifically foods, again, that were highest in fiber and lowest in calories. So you can think things like vegetables, things like more dense and lean protein sources, and then things like potatoes, which sometimes have been given a bad rap, but invariably plain potatoes are actually some of the most nutrient dense, most fibrous, most satiating, lowest calorie foods that we can consume, which in and of itself then would make it a fat loss food. So let's talk about these things. Let's talk about protein and aging. And as I've been alluding to, the majority of the population is grossly under consuming protein, especially as we get older. For those of you listening, guys, it's very clear that we're under consuming protein intake. In this particular study, they found, and this was a study in 65 and older, but there's plenty of research on protein intake and almost protein deficiency as we age. And one of the reasons for this is, as I mentioned, the reduction in muscle mass. I mentioned the digestive and neurodegeneration that happens. Well, one of the reasons for this is because our anabolic response to protein intake becomes reduced as we get older. For men, our testosterone levels get reduced. For women, again, an imbalance in estrogen to progesterone. We need more protein to offset inflammatory and catabolic conditions that come with acute and chronic disease states. So if we have diabetes, if we have metabolic syndrome, if we have cardiovascular disease, if we have any immune system suppression, if we have gastrointestinal issues and Crohn's, IBS, colitis, poor digestion of our food, then we actually need more protein intake far and above what the normal recommendations are, up to 2 times what, and then some of what the recommended daily allowance is. And so this study, showed that new evidence shows that older adults need more dietary protein than do younger adults to support good health, promote recovery from illness, and maintain functionality. So of course, we're talking about muscle mass. We're talking about maintaining muscle mass. We know as we get older, if we're losing muscle mass, we're not going to be as strong. We're not going to be able to move around as effectively. And this is about quality of life too, because no one wants to live their last 10 years, in a wheelchair and a diaper. Like, it's just, who wants that? No one. It's about what we're doing right now that's setting the stage for our later quality of life and body composition. And there was an interesting study here. They called it the protege study. And of course, they, play on words. They combined protein and age. But that recommended 1 to 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. That's basically about 0.5 gram per pound. So if you weigh 200 pounds, it's going to be 100 grams of protein. But evidence is really showing up to, for many of us, about 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. And what I typically recommend for clients, depending on where they are, but definitely if we're talking about fat loss and improving body composition, we should be shooting for anywhere from 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of body weight. And I want to put this really briefly into perspective here, is that you may not have an idea. So if you weigh 150 or 200 pounds, that's close to 150 or 200 pounds of protein. Well, about a 4-ounce portion, or let's just say a palm-sized portion of protein, is probably about 4 ounces, or let's just say 25 grams of protein. So if you weigh 150 pounds, well, you would need to eat 6 4-ounce portions of, let's just say, animal protein, but I'm going to give you some other sources here. So in all likelihood, it's significantly more than most of us are consuming. And I'll be honest, very rarely have I worked with anyone over all of these years that's consuming adequate amounts of protein relative to their goals. So let's talk through protein sources. I want to give you some easy solutions that you can implement right away. And to respect everyone's time, I'm not going to dig into the research very much. I'm just going to give a very general overview. And then I've provided all of these great references. So if you want these slides, I'm happy to share them with you. But the first sort of protein superfood, and we'll say fat loss food in here, is whey protein. Now, whey is a protein that's derived from dairy, from milk, from cow milk. However, there are goat proteins and so on, but it's beneficial. One is because it's very easily digested and absorbed because it's already broken down into a powder. So it's something that you can mix in water or juice perhaps, or something like that. But this study specifically showed that there were increases in fat loss and sparing of lean muscle tissue. So I want you to think back to the slide where I showed all of the different diets. And remember that I mentioned that it doesn't matter the diet for weight loss, as long as we're in a calorie deficit. However, what all of these diets show is that, yes, people lose weight, but as we lose weight, my friends, as we lose weight, we also lose muscle mass. We also lose bone density. And the more aggressively we diet, so the more weight we lose in the short term, the more of those beneficial and important tissues we're going to lose. That is problematic. So you may have experienced or known someone who loses a significant amount of weight over a short period of time. Well, oftentimes, what they're losing a lot of is they're losing a lot of muscle mass. They're losing a lot of water tissue. And they're losing some bone density. Of course, they're losing some fat mass, but it's under those situations that makes it very easy for people to gain that weight back. So what we need to be cognizant of here is when we're losing weight, we need to make sure we're doing everything we can to maintain muscle mass and lose as much body fat as possible. And that's why when we're dieting, that's why when we're in a calorie deficit, it's paramount to keep our protein intake high, very high relative to our total calorie intake. So let's say of those 1,500 calories that we're dieting at, we need to make sure we're consuming around 30%, not 16% like the average American diet, but closer to 30%, if not more, of those calories from protein. And that's where, when we compare studies on diets that either have a higher protein intake versus a lower protein intake, while people lose the same amount of weight on the scale, the people that eat the most protein relative to their calorie intake maintain the most muscle mass and lose the most body fat. That's huge. That's huge, and which is why it's so important to keep our protein intake high, not only when we're dieting, but certainly as we get older too, to support lean muscle tissue. Now, the other reason that this protein, specifically whey protein, is beneficial is because it helps us suppress our appetite. In this study, it actually showed an appetite suppression from meal to meal, and sort of helped us curb our food intake at the following meal. So a little trick that I'll implement with clients is to use whey protein as what we call a buffer. And so what I'll have someone do is, if they're going out to a party or they're going out to eat and they want to be able to more effectively manage their calorie intake, and we want to help them, of course, keep their protein intake high, I'll have them take a scoop or two of whey protein in water and drink it before they go, because it's going to help them curb their appetite. It's going to help them feel more satiated and full at that meal, and then they're going to be a lot less likely to eat all the bread in the bread basket, or if we go to Mexican, eat all the chips, right, and salsa before the food even gets there. That's definitely my problem. And then of sort of ancillary importance here, but that's really applicable for all of you listening here, is there's certain therapeutic applications of whey protein really as an immune enhancing food property. It has the ability to act as an antioxidant. It has the ability to act as a to help us reduce our blood pressure, to be anti-cancerous, to help us regulate our lipids, our blood cholesterol levels, to act as an antiviral and antibacterial. A chelating agent helps us detoxify. And the reason for this is because it has the ability to increase levels of glutathione, which is a powerful antioxidant that the body produces. And so there's some really interesting research on this, but for all of those reasons, whey perhaps is the most powerful fat loss food and health food in many cases, especially as we get older. We may have issues, one, eating enough animal protein or just protein in general, especially if it's coming from plant-based sources. That's a lot of food. So the second protein source is dairy. And dairy is another one that's relatively easy to consume. It's very dense in protein relative to the total calorie intake. And in this particular study, what they found was that when they took 3 groups, they gave them adequate amounts of protein. So let's just say they gave them around 30%, anywhere from 15 to 30% of their dietary intake, of their calorie intake from protein. The groups, one, that were consuming the highest amount of protein responded the best, but also the highest amount of protein from dairy specifically responded in terms of having greater strength output over the course of a 16-week study, and more significant body fat loss over the course of a 16-week period. So dairy can be a really easy one. And a couple of the dairy sources that I find are very beneficial and easy to consume to help us increase protein intake is low-fat cottage cheese, simply because you can kind of spice it up in so many different ways, right? You can make it sweet, so you can add things like coffee creamer or fruit to it, or even cereal to it. You can make it savory by adding some spices or pepper or cucumbers or carrots or ranch powder. And one container is not that many calories. It's probably like 500 calories and like 70 grams of protein. So it makes for a great meal / snack throughout the day. Now, another great source of protein that I'm sure many of you are aware of, but I want to talk specifically about how it's kind of can be seen as a fat loss food, is fatty fish like salmon. And this is because of the omega-3 fatty acids, which I'm sure many of you have heard about. But what we see, and when I mentioned that, the majority of Americans are eating a lot more processed and refined, so processed fats and oils and refined grains. One of the problems that we have with this is we consume a lot of omega-6 fatty acids, which far exceeds the amount of omega-3 fatty acids that we should be consuming. And that's problematic because the omega-6 fatty acids are very inflammatory in the body. So we need to make sure we're consuming enough omega-3s to balance that out. And really quick story for you is if any of you listening were on my last talk, I mentioned how I spent years and years measuring thousands of people in terms of their body composition and actually doing, actual caliper body fat measurements. And one of the things I observed, interestingly enough, is that when I correlated their body composition to their dietary intake, one of the observations was that the people who had the most hard, dense, inflamed feeling skin tissue and adipose fat tissue were also the ones that were consuming the most amount of highly processed, highly refined foods. So we also know that these omega-3 fatty acids can actually help support the inflammation process in the body. And so they can actually help us improve our body composition and almost counteract these metabolic changes that come as we age, certainly due to obesity, because they help us improve fat metabolism. They help us regulate hormones like leptin, and leptin is one of the hormones that helps us manage our hunger and satiety from meal to meal, as well as control factors for obesity and cardiovascular disease. And then again, they help quell inflammation in the body and improve fat cell health. So as I mentioned, like when I would be measuring people, their fat cells were inflamed and hard and dense, unhealthy tissue. As we eat more healthy fats, we literally are what we eat. And so our cellular membranes start to restructure to be a lot healthier fatty acid tissues, which becomes a lot more pliable and less inflamed, and so on and so forth. So it's very, very interesting stuff. And the last protein source that I'm going to mention here is eggs. Now, eggs have gotten a very bad rap over the years. Eggs are actually, in the research now, have shown to be cardioprotective, go figure, is for most people. And of course, there's always outliers. And if you're someone that's concerned about your cholesterol, then by all means, talk to your medical professional. But the research is clear that it's not about the cholesterol in the food, rather how the body manufactures the cholesterol when it's in an inflammatory state. And so eggs can be a very healthy, very nutrient dense, high in vitamins and mineral, high in protein source of food. Now, one of the things to take into consideration is the types of foods that we consume with our protein sources and how we cook our protein sources. And so this, I think, is where a lot of the observational studies of the past around our protein intake, and perhaps the contribution of protein to things like heart disease and cancer. Well, if we think about this for a second, what are a lot of the foods that we would consume with eggs as an example? Well, we would consume things like bacon, like sausage, like pancakes and syrup. And so highly refined sugars and carbohydrates and highly processed animal proteins and fats, which we know are carcinogenic. Then compound that with the way that we're cooking our proteins. And so when we cook our food, especially at high temperatures, for example, if we're frying eggs or if we're grilling meat at high temperatures, especially with things like barbecue sauces and sugar-based dressings, well, these sugars burn and they compound with the protein to create things that are called AGEs, advanced glycation end products. And it's these molecular compounds in and of themselves that are very carcinogenic, that help increase free radical damage in the body, oxidative damage, and essentially exacerbate the aging process. So it's very, very interesting to take into consideration. It might not actually be the foods themselves, but what we're eating with the foods and how we're certainly cooking those foods. So let's get into the last couple fat loss foods that I want to share with you. And one of the foods that I alluded to earlier is potatoes. And I just want to mention this chart again, and I know it's very difficult to see, but essentially I'm just going to explain it for you again. Is they took 238 different foods. So they took some fruit, they took some carbohydrate-rich food, things like potato and oats and white bread and whole grain bread and French fries. And then they took some protein-rich foods and some cereal grains and some different snack foods and some bakery foods. And they compared them all in a 240 calorie serving to find which ones created the most satiety. And far and away, if you can see at the far right side of this graph, there's one yellow line that far surpasses all of the other foods. And that was actually potatoes. Plain yellow or white, plain yellow potatoes had significantly greater satiety than any other food, which really makes it a very powerful fat loss food. And the reason for that, again, is because it is per volume is very low in calories and very high in fiber. And so, what the study also found, and this probably makes logical sense to you, is that the higher the palatability and the fat of the food. So think things like French fries and chips. These are very palatable foods. You can eat and eat and eat and never really feel full. The lower the satiety, right? Exactly that is you can eat those foods forever. I can crush a loaded potato because it has salt and fat and extra fat and different textures on it versus a plain potato. Like, how many plain potatoes can you sit down and eat? Probably not that many, because frankly, it's boring, and you know it's very, very filling. And no one said fat loss had to be sexy, because this is a powerful fat loss food, because it's going to help you stay full. It's going to provide a ton of nutritional value and fiber, like resistant starch. And this is a fiber in things like potato and corn that actually doesn't allow digestion in the body. It's resistant. That's why it's called a resistant starch, because it can't be broken down by your digestive enzymes. And so what it does is it actually feeds your large and small intestinal gut bacteria in a beneficial way. This is something that we would consider to be called a prebiotic versus a probiotic. But what's really interesting about the potatoes and the resistant starch is that when the food is hot, when the potatoes are hot, the resistant starch is actually very low. And so the potato is going to be a lot more likely to be broken down faster in the body. However, when you cook it and then let it cool completely, it completely changes the fiber content, and the resistant starches become very high. So one little tip is, if you are eating potatoes, you want to eat them actually as if just eating, plain potatoes wasn't bad enough. Now I'm suggesting eating plain cold potatoes, but I'm just telling you what the research says, my friends, and then certainly kind of sharing anecdotal evidence as to why potatoes can be such a superfood. Now let's finish off in terms of our fat loss foods with oats. And oats are can be a powerful fat loss food, specifically because of one of the fibers in them called beta-glucan. And beta-glucan has a positive effect on perceptions of satiety. So we've all heard that, oats are a great source of heart health and managing cholesterol. And it probably has something to do with the amount of fibers, the types of fibers in the oats, because it helps keep us satiated from meal to meal. So the proteins in conjunction with these types of carbohydrates seem to be the most satiating type foods that can help us manage a calorie deficit as we work towards losing body fat and maintaining muscle mass, so that we can improve our body composition. So let's help you walk away with some applicable guidelines here. And let's talk about fat loss habits. Now, as I mentioned at the very beginning, fat loss comes down to creating a calorie deficit. Now, one of the ways that we can do that is we can first and foremost just figure out how much we're consuming, and then we can reduce our calorie intake by a certain amount. So what would be beneficial would be to actually track your food intake, whether you're just writing it down or whether you're actually using a calorie tracking app, and then do that for a week or two. And then what you can do is you can simply reduce your calories. Just reduce the portion sizes of the foods that you're consuming by anywhere from 15 to 25%, and you should see that weight is starting to change. Now, in some cases, it's more complex than that, but generally speaking, that's a very good way to do that. And or you can increase your physical activity levels as well. Now, within that is you want to make sure you're increasing your intake of protein-dense, high-satiety foods, like I've been alluding to. And then another way is you can simply just take an analysis, a loose analysis of your nutrition intake, and you can just decrease the intake of many of the low satiety foods, right? So those are the foods that are highly processed, highly refined. Think things like bread, pasta, chips, cookies, cakes, sweets, things like that, wine, alcohol, processed carbs, that can make a huge calorie difference. if you don't want to track your calories. Now, as I mentioned, the things that are going to be the biggest drivers to help support you when you're managing your calories, in order to effectively manage your calories, keep your protein high, keep your fiber high, keep your water high, support lean muscle tissue, is what I call the 5S formula that I learned from one of my mentors and have adopted and share this with many of my clients. And of course, with you, is this 5S formula to help us consume more protein, fiber, and water. And so what this 5S is building our meals around things like soups, salads, scrambles, shakes, and stir fries. And all of these foods are going to be high in fiber, right? Soups, we can have lots of vegetables. We can throw in a protein source. Salads obviously has a lot of vegetables, which also have a lot of water in them and a lot of fiber. Scrambles have more protein. Shakes, you can throw in whey protein. Stir fries are usually just meat and vegetables, and so on and so forth. So you get the idea there. Now, in addition to the nutrition, we've got to talk about fat loss habits that can help us maintain, if not improve, lean muscle mass as we age. First and foremost is strength training. If you are not strength training, you should be. There's no ifs, ands, or buts around it. We need to be doing weight-bearing exercises to help us, at the very least, maintain the amount of muscle mass that we have as we get older, instead of losing every single year, in addition to supporting our bones and our bone density with weight-bearing exercise. This is very important from a quality of life standpoint. We need to move daily up and beyond 10,000 steps a day, drinking half of our body weight in ounces of water. Surround yourself with like-minded people who are going to be supportive of your health, weight loss, and physical activity goals. And if needed, hire a coach like me, because I can help you expedite the process. If you were interested in working together and finding out more about my Smart Nutrition Coaching Program, you've got my email now. You have my phone number. Write it down really quickly here, and it's in the email that I sent you. And just shoot me a message, and we can have a conversation and see if the coaching program is the right fit for you. Again, I want to really thank the Jewish Community Center. They are, if you are not already a member, which I think most of you are, but if you're catching this recording and you are not a member, you can join the JCC today. There's no registration fee. The first month is free, and they're offering 2 free 30-minute personal training sessions. For those of you listening that are members, they're offering 3 30-minute sessions for $99. They've got a crew of excellent trainers. It is absolutely a no-brainer. If you're not currently strength training, you don't know what to do, to hire a trainer and get strength training. So now I can field any questions that you have. I have about, let's see, I have about 10 minutes left. So by all means, I'm going to stop the share and let's fire away if anyone has questions.
Not a question. Hi, Ben.
Hi, Lauren.
I just want to introduce everyone. My name is Lauren, the fitness director here at the J. If anyone has any questions regarding membership or personal training, I will shoot my email in the chat and my phone number. So just feel free to reach out to me. All of our trainers here are specialized in anything from weight loss to strength training, to balance, to the aging population. We are all here to help with all of your needs, as well as membership. We do offer a ton of group X classes, anywhere from cycle to aqua, Pilates, yoga, Zumba, our higher intensity interval training, strength and core. But we also have a lot of it also on the side for fitness, adult programming. You can learn to play bridge at canasta. We have cooking classes, discussion groups. You can learn to knit. We have a hiking club and a walking club, live music's by the pool on Wednesday. So we have a ton of fun things going on. For those not comfortable coming back to in-building or in-person activities, we still have virtual stuff as well. So again, feel free to reach out to me as well, and looking forward to meeting you. Okay, Ben.
Ben, I just wanted to say thank you. in 45 minutes, you gave us a lot of information. I took a lot of notes, and I really appreciate it. Everything you said is common sense, but to write it down and other than the potatoes, which I wasn't aware of, everything else I kind of knew. And I've been to a lot of these kind of classes, but you really did a good job in summarizing it in a quick way, and it was very understandable. So thank you.
Thank you, Alan. I appreciate that. Gail.
Question, can you address how heredity plays into this?
Yeah, just in terms of our genetic.
Well, like when you're, genetics and stuff, when you've got a family history of something, or parents are always have dealt with weight loss, and it
absolutely
sort of just falls into.
Yeah. So, one of the common sayings with genetics is sort of what they say is genetics load the gun, and environment and lifestyle pulls the trigger. And so we all have genetic predispositions to certain things, to perhaps diabetes or heart disease or cancer, or even, storing body fat in certain areas of our body relative to other people, right? And what we know is that our lifestyle, our nutrition, our physical activity levels have the ability to offset what genetics might actually have in line for us, if that makes sense. Or we have the ability to flip on and flip off the switches that our genetics predispose for us. I can't speak too terribly in depth, but other than saying, like, for example, omega-3 fatty acids is a great example of, with the higher our omega-3 fatty acids, the more likely we are to offset, certain heart disease conditions and such. And so I think that we have a lot of control over what happens to us if we're being terribly proactive about it, which we all should be.
Well, okay, I have a very important question, because you started to lose me when you said no wine. So vodka that's potato based, is that okay?
So the goal with caloric reduction, the goal with fat loss is reducing your calories. So I don't care what you drink, as long as you're managing your calories. There's no difference here between vodka or wine or tequila or whiskey or margaritas. It's like, guys, you just got to figure out a way to manage calories that works for you. Yeah. However, alcohol in any form is not a fat loss food. It's great, but it's not a fat loss food. Anyone else?
Ben, this is Roger and Barbara. Thank you for the presentation. It was excellent. Your slide with the 5 S's, one of them was scrambles. Is that scrambled eggs, or is that something else?
Yeah, it's so scrambled eggs with vegetables, and perhaps you could throw in, something like turkey or ham or something like that. But as a great way to get a high amount of protein, to get some vegetables in there, and keep the calories rather manageable.
All right. We're Jewish. We can't put ham in there.
Well, turkey, of course. Exactly. I'm sure we're all kosher.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Awesome. Okay, guys. Well, then we'll wrap it up. I'll let you get on with your day. I can't tell you how appreciative I am for all of you taking the time out of your day to jump in with me. Again, by all means, shoot me an email if you have any questions whatsoever about anything that I discussed. We're going to be sharing the recording with membership. And I'm happy to share the slides with you as well if you want any of the references. And again, you've got my contact info. And you've got Lauren's as well. So please, if you're interested in training, working with a highly specialized fitness coach here at the J to be doing some of those weight-bearing exercises, please reach out to her. They've got an incredible staff. It's an incredible facility, as you all know. And hopefully I'll see you around the halls one of these days. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Christina.
Thank you, Ben.
Hi, Brad.
Hi, Christina.
I
Thank
miss
you, Ben.
you.
Hi, Christina.